everything. Most people believe their thoughts control them. Mentally strong people know something different. They understand that thoughts are not commands, emotions are not enemies, everything, and circumstances are not destiny. Strength of mind is not about being fearless or emotionless. It's about thinking clearly under pressure, choosing responses with intention, everything, and refusing to surrender power to doubt, fear, or impulse. This audiobook will change the way you interpret your inner world, so you can move through life with calm, confidence, everything, and unshakable self-trust. Most people move through their days believing every thought that enters their mind. A doubt appears and they assume it must be true. A fear speaks up, everything, and they treat it like a warning siren. A harsh inner comment shows up, and they accept it as an accurate description of who they are. Mentally strong people live differently, everything. They understand something subtle but powerful. A thought is not a fact, and an inner voice is not an authority. It is simply a stream of mental noise shaped by past experiences, habits, everything, and emotional reactions. And once you realize that, everything changes. Imagine the mind like a crowded room filled with voices talking at the same time. Some are calm, some are panicked, everything. Some are critical, some are lazy, and some are wise. The mistake most people make is giving the loudest voice the microphone. Mentally strong people don't silence the room. They listen, everything, but they choose which voice gets to lead. They step back just enough to observe what is happening inside them, instead of being swept away by it, everything. Think about a moment when you were about to start something important. Maybe it was a difficult conversation, a new project, or a personal goal you'd been avoiding. Before you even moved, appeared, "I'm not ready," or "What if I fail?" or "Other people are better than me." That thought felt convincing, almost protective, everything. It sounded like it was trying to keep you safe. But mentally strong people pause right there. They don't argue emotionally, and they don't obey automatically. They ask a quiet question, everything. Is this thought useful? This is the first shift. Strength begins with observation. Instead of saying, "I am afraid," they notice everything. Fear is speaking. Instead of saying, "I can't do this," they recognize, "My mind is producing a limiting story." That small change creates space, and in that space, choice becomes possible. Everything. Consider someone who wakes up in the morning already exhausted. The inner dialogue starts immediately. "Another long day. I don't have the energy. What's the point?" For most people, everything. That voice sets the tone for everything that follows. Their body follows the script their mind just handed them. Mentally strong people interrupt that script, everything. They don't wait to feel motivated, they replace the language, not with fake positivity, but with intentional clarity. Today will require effort, everything. I can handle effort. I don't need to feel ready to take the first step. I've handled hard days before. Language matters more than people realize. Everything. The words you use internally shape how your nervous system responds. Saying, "I have to," creates resistance. Saying, "I choose to," creates agency. Everything. Saying, "This is impossible," shuts down problem solving. Saying, "This is challenging," keeps the mind open. Everything. Mentally strong people train their inner dialogue the same way an athlete trains their body. Repetition, awareness, and correction. There's a story many people can relate to. Everything. A person receives criticism at work. Maybe it's fair, maybe it isn't. Instantly, the inner voice attacks. "You're not good enough. You always mess things up." Everything. Everyone sees it now. That voice feels personal and absolute. A mentally strong person hears the same words, but processes them differently. They separate information from interpretation, everything. They might think, "This feedback points to something I can improve," or "This doesn't define my entire ability." They refuse to let one moment turn into a permanent identity, everything. This doesn't mean they ignore pain or pretend not to care. It means they don't let the inner dialogue spiral unchecked. They know that unchecked thoughts multiply, everything. One negative thought becomes 10, and 10 become a belief. Strength is stopping that chain early. Another key difference is how mentally strong people talk to themselves during failure. Everything. When something goes wrong, many people become their own worst enemy. The inner voice becomes cruel, impatient, and shaming. But ask yourself this, everything. Would you ever speak to someone you care about the way you speak to yourself when you fail? Mentally strong people don't motivate themselves through humiliation. Everything. They use constructive language. "That didn't work. Here's what I can adjust. This hurts, but it doesn't end me. I'm allowed to learn." There's power in neutral language. Everything. Not everything needs emotional weight. Sometimes the strongest inner dialogue is calm and factual, like a coach on the sidelines saying, focus, breathe, everything. Next move. This steadiness is not accidental. It's practiced. One of the most freeing realizations is that you don't have to win every argument inside your head. Everything. Some thoughts don't deserve engagement. They don't need analysis or debate. They need dismissal. Mentally strong people recognize patterns. If a thought shows up every time they try to grow everything, they label it. This is my fear of change talking. Once labeled, it loses authority. Think of someone who wants to improve their health. Every time they consider exercising, everything, a thought appears. You'll quit anyway. That thought is familiar. It's old. Mentally strong people don't treat familiar thoughts as wise thoughts. They treat them as habits. Everything. And habits can be replaced. They respond with action, not argument. They move their body before the debate gets louder. Control of inner dialogue also shows up in moments of success. Everything. Some people sabotage themselves with thoughts like, I don't deserve this, or this won't last. Mentally strong people catch that too. Everything. They allow themselves to stand in confidence without apology. They remind themselves, I earned this through effort. They don't rush to minimize their own progress. Over time, everything. This practice reshapes identity. When you consistently choose empowering language, you begin to see yourself as someone who can handle discomfort, think clearly, and respond intentionally. Everything. The inner dialogue becomes less chaotic and more supportive. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become steadier. There will still be days when the mind is loud. Everything. When doubt shows up uninvited. When old narratives try to take control. Mental strength is not the absence of these moments. It is the skill of meeting them without surrendering. Everything. It is knowing that you are not the voice in your head, but the one listening to it. And in that listening, you gain authority. You choose words that move you forward. Everything. You choose thoughts that align with who you are becoming. You learn to speak to yourself with firmness, honesty, and respect. Not to comfort yourself into staying the same, everything, but to guide yourself into growth. This is how mentally strong people think. Not louder, not harsher, not more aggressive, clearer, calmer, more intentional. Everything. They understand that the greatest conversations they will ever have are the ones that happen silently, inside their own mind, every single day. Emotions are not the enemy. Everything. That idea alone changes everything. Most people spend their lives either fighting their emotions or obeying them, never realizing that strength lives in the space between those two extremes. Everything. Mentally strong people understand something subtle, but powerful. Emotions are information, not instructions. They allow themselves to feel fully. Everything. But they do not hand over control of their behavior to whatever emotion happens to be loudest in the moment. Think about the last time you were angry, anxious, or overwhelmed. In that state, everything. Your mind probably felt urgent. Thoughts rushed in with force. Words wanted to escape your mouth immediately. Decisions felt pressing, as if waiting would somehow make things worse. Everything. That urgency is emotional energy asking for action, but mentally strong people pause right there. They recognize the surge for what it is. They don't suppress it. Everything. But they don't obey it either. A mentally strong thinker might say, I'm angry right now, instead of, this situation is unbearable. That small shift creates distance. Everything. It turns the emotion into an experience rather than an identity. When you say, I am angry, you are acknowledging a feeling. When you say, this is unbearable, you are letting the emotion define reality. Everything. Strong thinkers are careful with that distinction because they know that decisions made in emotional fog often create consequences that last far longer than the emotion itself. Everything. Imagine a professional athlete in a high-stakes moment. The crowd is loud. The pressure is intense. Their heart is racing. Fear is present. Excitement is present. Everything. If they let those emotions dictate their actions, their performance would collapse. Instead, they breathe. They narrow their focus. They trust the training they've already done. Everything. The emotions are still there, but the decision-making comes from a calmer, more deliberate place. Mental strength works the same way in everyday life. Everything. Even when the stakes don't look dramatic from the outside. In real life, this shows up in conversations, conflicts, and quiet moments of self-doubt. Someone criticizes you unfairly, everything, and your chest tightens. The impulse is to defend yourself immediately or strike back with words meant to hurt. Mentally strong people feel that impulse clearly. Everything. They don't pretend it's not there. But they ask themselves a critical question. If I act on this emotion right now, everything, will I respect the outcome later? That question alone can change the course of a moment. Separating emotions from decisions does not mean becoming cold or detached. In fact, everything. It requires more awareness, not less. It takes strength to sit with discomfort without rushing to escape it. Anxiety often demands reassurance. Anger often demands expression. Everything. Sadness often demands withdrawal. Strong thinkers let those demands pass before choosing what to do next. They understand that emotions rise and fall like waves. Everything. But decisions can carve permanent paths. There's a story many people can relate to: sending a message you later regret. In the heat of emotion, the words feel justified. They feel necessary. Everything. Hours later, when the emotion fades, the message remains. Mentally strong people learn this lesson early or painfully. Over time, they build a rule for themselves: no important decisions. Everything. No permanent actions, no defining conversations while emotions are peaking. They wait, not because they are weak, but because they value clarity more than release. Everything. This skill becomes especially important under pressure. Pressure amplifies emotion. When time feels limited or outcomes feel critical, emotions grow louder. Everything. Stress tells you that everything must be decided now. Mentally strong people recognize this as a distortion. They slow their breathing. They ground themselves in facts. Everything. They separate what they feel from what they know. This grounding allows them to respond instead of react. One practical way to do this is to name the emotion internally before acting. Saying, "Everything. This is fear," or "This is frustration," gives your rational mind a chance to step forward. Another powerful technique is delaying action just slightly. Even a pause of 10 seconds, everything, one deep breath, or a short walk can interrupt the emotional momentum enough to restore balance. That pause is where strength lies. In relationships, everything. This way of thinking can be transformative. When emotions run high, people often say things meant to win the moment, not protect the connection. Mentally strong individuals think differently. Everything. They ask themselves what kind of person they want to be in this relationship, not just how they want to feel right now. They choose words that align with their values. Everything, even when emotions push them toward easier, harsher responses. This also applies inwardly, in the private conversations you have with yourself. When you fail, everything. Emotions may tell you that you're not good enough, that you always mess things up, that trying is pointless. Strong thinkers hear those thoughts without surrendering to them. Everything. They separate the emotional reaction from the factual situation. A mistake becomes data, not a verdict. Disappointment becomes a signal to adjust, not a reason to quit. Over time, everything. This separation builds deep inner stability. You begin to trust yourself, not because life becomes easier, but because you know you won't abandon reason when emotions intensify. Everything. You learn that you can experience fear and still act courageously. You can feel sadness and still move forward. You can feel anger and still choose dignity. Everything. That trust becomes a quiet confidence that doesn't depend on mood or circumstance. It's important to understand that mental strength is not about never feeling overwhelmed. Everyone does. Everything. The difference is what happens next. Weak patterns say, "I feel this way, so I must act this way." Strong patterns say, "I feel this way, everything, and I still choose my response." That single shift is the foundation of self-control, resilience, and mature confidence. As you practice this, you may notice something unexpected. Everything. Emotions begin to feel less threatening. When you stop fearing them, they lose some of their power. You stop rushing to escape discomfort. Everything. There comes a moment in every life when frustration feels heavier than effort. You work hard, you try to do the right thing, and yet outcomes don't always follow your plans. Everything. People disappoint you. Circumstances shift without warning. Luck seems unfairly distributed. Mentally strong people face the same reality, but they think about it differently. Everything. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they ask, "What part of this is mine to control?" That single shift in thinking changes everything. Everything. Most emotional exhaustion doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from caring deeply about things you were never meant to command. Other people's choices, the past, random events, everything. The opinions of strangers. Mentally strong people recognize a hard truth early in life: energy is finite. Every ounce spent on resentment, blame, everything, or wishing reality were different is an ounce stolen from growth. So they guard their attention carefully. They don't ignore reality, but they refuse to wrestle with what won't move. Everything. Think about how often frustration sounds like this: if only they would change. If only the situation were fair. If only the timing was better. These thoughts feel natural. Everything. But they quietly drain power. They trap you in reaction mode, waiting for the world to cooperate before you move forward. Mentally strong people don't wait. They move with what they have. everything, where they are, as they are. Imagine two people stuck in traffic, late for an important meeting. One grips the steering wheel, cursing the road, the city, the drivers ahead, everything. Their heart rate spikes. Their mind spirals. The other notices the same traffic, takes a breath and thinks, I can't control this jam, everything, but I can control how I arrive. They adjust their expectations, maybe make a call, steady their breathing. Both experience the same delay. Only one arrives mentally intact, everything. That difference isn't personality, it's focus. This way of thinking doesn't deny pain or difficulty. Mentally strong people feel frustration fully. They acknowledge disappointment honestly, everything. But they don't build a home there. They let emotions pass through without handing them the keys. The question they return to, again and again, is simple. Everything. What's within my influence right now? And then they act on that answer. Control lives in three places: effort, attitude, and response. You may not control results, everything, but you always control how sincerely you try. You may not control circumstances, but you always control how you interpret them. You may not control what happens next, everything, but you always control how you respond when it does. This mindset doesn't make life easy, but it makes life workable. Consider someone who loses a job unexpectedly. Everything. One path leads to bitterness, blaming the economy, the company, the boss. Days turn into weeks of resentment, motivation evaporates, confidence erodes. Everything. Another path begins with disappointment but moves quickly toward ownership. I didn't choose this, but I choose what I do next. Updating skills, reaching out. Improving interview habits, everything. Rebuilding structure, same loss, completely different trajectory. This focus on control creates relief because it simplifies life. You stop carrying impossible responsibilities, everything. You stop trying to manage outcomes that were never yours to command. You stop measuring your worth by variables outside your influence. And in that release, strength grows, calm grows, everything, clarity grows. Mentally strong people also understand that blame feels powerful, but it's a trap. Blame gives the illusion of control while removing real responsibility. When you blame everything, you surrender your role as an active participant in your own life. You become a commentator instead of a creator. Strong thinkers refuse that position. They may acknowledge injustice, everything, but they don't live there. They move forward anyway. Think of a time when someone criticized you unfairly. The natural instinct is to replay it. Defend yourself mentally, everything. Imagine better comebacks. Ours are lost in imaginary conversations. Mentally strong people catch themselves sooner. They ask, is this helping me? If the answer is no, they redirect everything. Maybe they learned something useful from the criticism. Maybe they discard it entirely. Either way, they reclaim their attention. This isn't suppression, it's prioritization, everything. Your mind is not a courtroom where every accusation deserves a trial. Some thoughts don't earn the right to stay. Some battles don't deserve your energy. Strength is knowing the difference, everything. There's a quiet confidence that comes from this way of thinking. When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, you become deeply effective where control actually exists. Everything, your habits sharpen, your decisions become cleaner. You act instead of react. Over time, this compounds into a reputation for steadiness, for reliability, for resilience, everything. This mindset is especially powerful during failure. Failure often tempts people to look outward for reasons and inward for shame. Mentally strong people do something more productive, everything. They separate responsibility from self-worth. They ask, what part of this was within my control, and what can I adjust next time? There is no drama in that question, just learning. Everything. A student fails an exam. One response is helplessness. The test was unfair. I'm bad at this. Another response is ownership. My study method didn't work. Everything. I need a different approach. Same result. Only one leads forward. Over time, these small mental choices build either a fragile identity or a resilient one. Everything. Focusing on control also protects you from comparison. When you measure yourself against others, you judge your progress by variables you don't own, their resources, timing, background, everything. Advantages. Mentally strong people compare effort to effort, discipline to discipline, growth to growth. They ask, everything. Am I showing up better than I did before? That question restores agency instantly. There's deep freedom in accepting limits. Not resignation, but realism. Everything. When you accept what you can't change, you stop fighting reality and start working with it. You adapt, you pivot. You find creative solutions instead of emotional resistance. Everything. Life becomes less about winning every scenario and more about staying effective through all of them. Actionable control often starts small. It's choosing to show up on hard days. Everything. choosing to speak to yourself with respect, choosing to pause before reacting, choosing one productive step instead of spiraling. These choices don't look dramatic, but they are powerful. Everything. They're the foundation of mental strength. When frustration rises, mentally strong people slow down instead of speeding up emotionally. They breathe, they ground themselves. Everything. They ask better questions. What's the next right action? Not, who's at fault? This shift doesn't erase problems, but it puts you back in the driver's seat. Over time, everything. This way of thinking becomes an identity. You become someone who responds, not reacts. Someone who moves forward, not sideways. Someone who trusts themselves because they know everything. No matter what happens, they will focus on what they can control and let the rest pass without stealing their peace. Most people experience adversity and immediately ask, everything. Why is this happening to me? Mentally strong people ask a different question. They ask, what is this trying to teach me? That single shift changes everything. Everything. Because when hardship is interpreted as punishment, it drains energy, confidence, and hope. But when hardship is interpreted as training, it builds strength, clarity, and resilience. Everything. The event may be the same, but the meaning assigned to it determines whether a person breaks or grows. Think about how the human body works. Muscles do not grow during comfort. Everything. They grow during resistance. When you lift a weight, the muscle fibers experience tiny tears. That discomfort is not damage, it is a signal. It tells the body to rebuild stronger than before. Everything. Mentally strong people apply this same understanding to life. They recognize that emotional strain, failure, rejection, and uncertainty are not signs that something has gone wrong. Everything. They are signs that growth is happening, or at least that growth is being invited. Consider someone who loses a job unexpectedly. Everything. One person internalizes the loss as proof of personal failure. Their thinking becomes heavy and self-critical. They replay every mistake, question their worth, everything, and carry shame into the future. Another person experiences the same event but reframes it. They see it as feedback. Not feedback about their value as a human being, but about direction. Everything, skills, alignment, or timing. They ask what can be learned, what can be improved, and what new path might now be possible. The pain still exists, but it no longer controls the story. Everything. This ability to reframe adversity does not mean mentally strong people are positive all the time. They don't deny pain or pretend things don't hurt. They feel disappointment, frustration, everything, grief, and fear just like anyone else. The difference is that they do not stop thinking clearly just because they are uncomfortable. Everything. They allow emotions to pass through them without letting those emotions define reality. Discomfort becomes information, not identity. Everything. There is a powerful moment that happens when someone realizes that struggle is not a detour from the path, it is the path. Confidence grows not from things going smoothly, everything, but from surviving what once felt unbearable. When you look back at the hardest moments in your life, the moments that shaped you the most were rarely easy ones. Everything. They were moments that forced you to adapt, mature, and become more capable than you were before. Mentally strong people learn to recognize this pattern early. Everything. So adversity no longer feels random or cruel. It feels purposeful. Imagine an athlete training for competition. The training days are exhausting. The body aches. Progress feels slow. Everything. But the athlete understands something important. The pain is not punishment for wanting more. It is preparation for earning it. If the training were easy, it would not work. In the same way, everything, life applies pressure to prepare people for higher levels of responsibility, leadership, clarity, and self-trust. The pressure is not evidence of inadequacy. Everything. It is evidence of potential being tested. One of the most practical shifts mentally strong people make is changing the language they use internally. Instead of saying, everything, they say, this is happening for me. Instead of, I can't handle this, they say, this is challenging me to grow. Language shapes interpretation. Everything, and interpretation shapes emotional response. When adversity is framed as a teacher rather than an enemy, curiosity replaces helplessness. Everything. There is also an important distinction. Mentally strong people understand not all pain is meaningful, but all pain can be used. Some experiences are unfair. Some losses make no sense. Everything. Some situations are genuinely undeserved. Reframing does not justify harm or excuse injustice. It simply asks a different question after the fact, given that this happened. Everything. Who do I choose to become next? That choice restores power when circumstances have taken it away. Think of someone who faces repeated rejection, applications unanswered, opportunities missed, everything, doors closed. Without mental strength, rejection proof that trying is pointless. With mental strength, rejection becomes data. It reveals what needs refining, what skills are missing, everything, or whether the path itself needs adjustment. Over time, the person who learns from rejection becomes sharper, more adaptable, and more resilient than the person who never had to face it. Everything. Discomfort is often a signal that growth is nearby. Anxiety before a difficult conversation usually means honesty is required. Everything. Fear before a new opportunity usually means expansion is happening. Resistance often appears right before a breakthrough. Mentally strong people don't run from these signals. They slow down, everything, examine them, and act anyway. They understand that confidence is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. Everything. A practical way to build this mindset is to pause during adversity and ask 3 simple questions. What is this situation demanding of me right now? What skill, strength, everything, or perspective is it trying to develop? And how can I respond in a way my future self will respect? These questions shift the mind from victimhood into agency. Everything. They turn reaction into intention. Another powerful practice is reflection after hardship. Mentally strong people regularly look back and identify how past difficulties changed them. Everything. They notice increased patience, stronger boundaries, deeper empathy, or clearer priorities. This reinforces trust in their ability to handle future challenges. The mind learns everything through evidence that adversity does not destroy, it refines. Over time, this way of thinking creates quiet confidence. Life no longer feels fragile. Failure no longer feels final. Everything. When something goes wrong, the immediate response is not panic but assessment, not despair but adjustment, not self-blame but self-responsibility. The person becomes grounded. Everything. Not because life is predictable, but because they trust themselves to adapt. This is how hardship becomes fuel. Each challenge strengthens mental endurance. Everything. Each setback builds problem-solving ability. Each uncomfortable moment becomes proof that growth is happening beneath the surface, even if it cannot be seen yet. Everything. Mentally strong people do not wish for easier lives. They develop stronger minds. And as this mindset deepens, something subtle but powerful happens. Adversity loses its threat. Everything. It still hurts, it still matters, but it no longer defines limits. It becomes part of the process of becoming someone more capable, more resilient, and more confident than before. Everything. The struggle no longer asks, will this break you? It asks, who are you becoming through this? Imagine waking up every morning with a quiet certainty. Everything. A calm awareness that the choices you make today will ripple into your future. Mentally strong people live in this space. They understand that life is not about immediate gratification, everything, fleeting pleasure, or reacting to every impulse that flickers through the mind. Instead, they cultivate the patience to think in weeks, months, and even years, rather than hours and minutes. Everything. It is a mindset that demands discipline, but it is also a mindset that brings freedom, a freedom that comes from knowing you are shaping your destiny with each deliberate step. Everything. Think about the last time you felt the tug of instant reward. Maybe it was staying in bed an extra hour instead of going for a run. Everything. Scrolling endlessly through social media instead of working on a project, or choosing to eat something that felt comforting in the moment but left you drained afterward. These are small, everyday decisions, but they are also the crossroads where the battle between short-term satisfaction and long-term strength is fought. Everything. Mentally strong people recognize these moments not as minor annoyances, but as opportunities to practice the art of long-term thinking. Consider the story of a young professional who, every day, faced the temptation to skip studying for a certification that would advance her career. Her friends went out, she was tired after work, and the couch called her name like a siren. Everything. Yet she told herself, I am building my future self. She sat down with her books, she committed to the schedule she had designed, and she did it day after day. It wasn't easy. Everything. There were evenings when she doubted whether the effort was worth it. Everything. But the cumulative effect of choosing what mattered most over what felt easiest eventually transformed her career trajectory. She didn't just pass the exam. Everything. She developed a resilience and sense of self-mastery that no shortcut could have given her. That is the quiet power of thinking long-term. Everything. Term thinking requires you to step outside the narrow window of the present and look at your life as a continuum. It asks you to ask a simple question before every choice. Everything. Which version of myself do I want to become, and does this action move me closer to that version? When you learn to answer that question honestly, everything. Decisions stop being a tug-of-war between impulse and reason. Instead, they become deliberate acts of alignment. Eating that extra slice of cake may satisfy your taste buds for 10 minutes, everything. But skipping the gym today may set a subtle pattern of choices that shape your health for months, even years. Mentally strong people weigh the cost of now versus the gain of later. Everything, not as a theoretical exercise but as a lived reality. This mindset does not mean denying pleasure or living a life of constant austerity. On the contrary, everything. It allows for joy to be deeper and more meaningful, because it is earned, not fleeting. Imagine savoring a vacation after months of disciplined saving, everything. Or feeling the pride of completing a project that once seemed impossible. The satisfaction in these moments is richer precisely because it is not born of impulse, but of intention, everything. Mentally strong people understand this. They don't reject enjoyment, they delay it, they earn it, and they integrate it in a way that builds their life rather than undermines it, everything. One of the most challenging aspects of long-term thinking is the constant negotiation with emotions. Our minds are wired for immediate reward. Evolutionarily, everything. Seeking instant gratification was often necessary for survival. But today we live in a world designed to exploit that wiring. Social media notifications, on-demand entertainment, everything, and constant streams of information are all engineered to keep us hooked on the short-term high. Mentally strong people recognize this trap. They do not fight their emotions by brute force, everything. They observe them, acknowledge them, and then make decisions based on principle rather than impulse, everything. They understand that a temporary feeling of discomfort or impatience is a small price to pay for the payoff that comes from consistent, thoughtful action. Everything. Consider an athlete preparing for a competition. The early mornings, the strict diet, the hours of practice, all of it is grueling in the moment. It would be easy to quit, everything, to eat the junk food, to sleep in. But the athlete imagines crossing the finish line, the thrill of victory, everything. The satisfaction of knowing they did everything necessary to perform at their peak. That vision becomes stronger than the fleeting temptation. Everything. Long-term thinking allows them to endure temporary hardship for lasting fulfillment. Your life, in its own way, demands the same discipline. Everything. Actionable strategies emerge naturally from this mindset. Start by identifying your priorities, not just for today, but for the next year, 5 years, and even 10. Everything. Break those long-term goals into actionable steps and commit to doing one thing every day that nudges you closer to them. It could be reading a book, saving a small amount of money, everything, practicing a skill, or setting boundaries that protect your focus. Mentally strong people do not rely on bursts of motivation. They rely on systems that carry them forward when emotion fades. Everything. They prepare for life in a way that feels almost invisible at first, but compounds over time into massive results. Another important principle is patience. Everything. Long-term thinking is incompatible with impatience. When you choose meaning over comfort, you will face moments of doubt, moments where progress feels invisible, everything, and moments where shortcuts beckon. Mentally strong people learn to sit with discomfort, to trust in the process, and to understand that true growth is rarely instant, everything. They know that just as a tree takes years to grow tall and strong, their own character and success require persistent, steady cultivation. Everything. Every small decision to act in alignment with long-term goals is like watering that tree. Day by day, week by week, the roots grow deeper, and eventually, the results become undeniable. Everything. It is also worth reflecting on the emotional liberation this mindset provides. When you stop giving in to every fleeting impulse, everything. When you stop letting temporary feelings dictate your actions, there is a profound sense of freedom. You are no longer a slave to every passing desire, everything. You are anchored in a vision of yourself that transcends momentary comfort. That anchor allows you to navigate life with confidence, to resist distractions, everything, and to act in a way that consistently moves you toward the person you truly want to be. Finally, long-term thinking transforms how you view setbacks. A failure is not a catastrophe, everything. It is data. Mentally strong people do not panic at mistakes or let frustration dictate their next step. Instead, they analyze, adapt, everything, and continue moving forward with the same principles that guide their overall vision. They understand that the path to strength, success, and fulfillment is rarely linear, everything. There will be detours, stumbles, and moments of uncertainty, but every deliberate, aligned choice adds momentum to their trajectory. The essence of thinking long-term is deceptively simple, everything, yet profoundly transformative. It asks you to live each day as an investment in your future self, everything. to make choices that honor the person you are becoming rather than the person you are right now. It asks you to endure small discomforts for large gains, everything, to embrace patience in a world obsessed with instant reward, and to act with clarity and purpose even when emotions scream otherwise. Mentally strong people embody this philosophy every day, everything. They know that real power is not in reacting, it is in choosing, in aligning, and in thinking beyond the immediate horizon. By internalizing this approach, you begin to live life differently, everything. Small choices no longer feel trivial. Every decision carries weight, significance, and opportunity. You start to notice patterns, to recognize where you have been giving into impulse, everything, and to reclaim control over your actions. The more you practice, the easier it becomes. The impulse fades, the long-term perspective becomes instinctive, everything, and the life you are building starts to feel inevitable. It is a slow, deliberate transformation, but it is unstoppable for those who commit, everything. With every day lived in alignment with long-term vision, with every moment of discomfort endured for meaningful gain, you are constructing a life of purpose, resilience, and strength, everything. You are learning to act not as a passenger in your life, but as the deliberate architect of your future. This is how mentally strong people think. They choose the horizon over the immediate, everything, the meaningful over the convenient, and the self they are becoming over the fleeting desires of the moment.